As his frail body weakened, 92-year-old Arthur Crane set out on a final pilgrimage to Stonehenge, fulfilling a lifelong obsession. Guided by cryptic journal entries left by his archaeologist grandfather, Arthur unearthed a relic buried beneath the ancient stones, a shimmering artifact that bent light and warped the air around it. Holding it, time seemed to freeze. His heart raced as whispers filled his mind, revealing secrets that defied reason. Arthur realized this relic was not of Earth. Arthur Crane, a man nearing the twilight of his life, leaned heavily on his cane as the wind howled across the Salisbury Plain. The ancient monoliths of Stonehenge loomed before him, their stoic presence a stark contrast to the fragile man standing in their shadow. The weight of 92 years rested on Arthur's thin frame, but his resolve was unwavering. This journey was more than a farewell to a life well lived. It was the culmination of decades of obsession, the final chapter of a mystery that had haunted his family for generations. Arthur's late grandfather, Edward Crane, had been an archaeologist with a reputation for chasing the esoteric. His journals, filled with cryptic sketches and fragmented musings, were dismissed as the ramblings of a man too consumed by his own imagination. But Arthur had always believed there was more to the story. One entry, in particular, had ignited a fire in him as a boy. The stones hum with a life of their own. Beneath them lies a relic not of this earth, a key to secrets humanity is not ready to hold. Those words had followed Arthur through the years, from his days as a curious child to a determined historian. He had spent decades poring over his grandfather's notes, deciphering the ciphers and codes that obscured the truth. It wasn't until his failing health reminded him of his mortality that he finally cracked the final clue, a set of coordinates buried in the margins of a weathered page. They pointed here to Stonehenge, to a location untouched by the countless excavations that had sought to unravel the site's mysteries. The journey had been arduous. Every step of the way, Arthur's body protested. His doctors had warned him against such a physically taxing endeavor, but he refused to listen. This was his last chance, and he would see it through, even if it killed him. He arrived at Stonehenge under the cover of darkness, his frail hands clutching a flashlight and a small spade. The site was quiet, the towering stones casting long shadows in the moonlight. Arthur began to dig at the coordinates, his breath coming in shallow gasps. The ground was hard and unyielding, but he pressed on, his determination a force stronger than his failing body. As he worked, a strange sensation began to creep over him. It started as a faint vibration beneath his feet, barely perceptible, but it grew stronger with each shovelful of earth he removed. The air around him felt charged, as if the very atmosphere was alive with anticipation. His spade struck something solid. Arthur paused, his heart pounding. He knelt down and cleared away the dirt with his hands, revealing a smooth black surface unlike anything he had ever seen. The object was cool to the touch, yet it seemed to pulse faintly, as though it were alive. He lifted it from the ground, holding it up to the light. It was oblong and about the size of a football, its surface etched with intricate patterns that seemed to shift and dance when viewed from different angles. The moment he touched it, the world around him seemed to ripple. Stonehenge shimmered faintly, the ancient stones glowing with an otherworldly light. For a brief moment, Arthur thought he saw figures moving among the stones, tall, shadowy forms that seemed to watch him with an intensity that sent a chill down his spine. The artifact began to hum, a low, resonant sound that seemed to emanate from within. Arthur's mind was flooded with images, stars aligning, ancient rituals performed by figures cloaked in shadow, and a circle of beings whose very existence defied logic. The artifact spoke to him, not in words, but in emotions and sensations. It was a key, a bridge to something far greater than he could comprehend. Yet, with its revelations came warnings. Arthur felt the weight of its knowledge pressing down on him, a caution against tampering with forces beyond human understanding. The artifact seemed to carry with it a dual promise. unimaginable power and unspeakable consequences. As dawn broke, Arthur knew his time was running out. His body, weakened by years of wear and tear, was failing him. Sharp pains in his chest reminded him of the fragility of life, but he refused to stop. He carried the artifact to the center of the stone circle, where the vibrations were strongest. As he placed it on the ground, the stones seemed to come alive, glowing brighter than ever before. The air crackled with energy, and the ground beneath him trembled. Arthur felt himself being pulled into something vast and infinite. For a moment, he was everywhere and nowhere, a part of the universe itself. He saw galaxies being born, stars dying, and the intricate dance of time and space. It was breathtaking and terrifying all at once, and then, just as suddenly, it was over. Arthur found himself lying on the ground, the artifact gone, and the stones silent once more. As he lay there, his body too weak to move, Arthur felt a profound sense of peace. The journey had given him what he sought, not answers, but understanding. He had glimpsed the infinite, a brief window into the vast complexity of existence, and in that moment, Arthur knew he had fulfilled his purpose. With a faint smile on his lips, he whispered his final words. Some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved. Arthur awoke to the cold reality of the Salisbury Plain, his frail body sprawled on the grass within the stone circle. Dawn painted the sky with hues of gold and crimson, but his vision remained clouded with exhaustion. The artifact was gone. For a fleeting moment, Arthur thought he had dreamed it all, but the ache in his chest and the faint vibrations in the air told him otherwise. The relic had been real, and it had shown him things no mortal was meant to see. The whispers persisted. At first, they were faint murmurs in his mind, fragments of a language both foreign and strangely familiar. But as he pushed himself upright, they grew louder, forming phrases that seemed to resonate from within the stones themselves. Arthur steadied himself on his cane, the effort leaving his hands trembling. He knew he had crossed a threshold into something far beyond his comprehension, but what awaited him next was unclear. His hands fumbled for his satchel, retrieving the weathered journal that had guided him here. The fragile pages crinkled beneath his fingers as he flipped to the celestial chart his grandfather had sketched decades ago. Edward Crane's cryptic notes surrounded the diagram, referencing alignments of stars and a gate that opened only for those who see beyond. Arthur stared at the chart, the faintest glimmer of understanding dawning on him. Tonight's sky could hold the key to unlocking the artifact's mystique. As the morning passed, Arthur's sense of unease grew. He could feel an unseen presence, a shadow lurking at the edge of his vision. It wasn't the movement of wildlife or the wind's subtle shifts. It was deliberate. Someone, or something, was watching him. He scanned the plain, his breath catching, but there was no one there. Yet the feeling persisted, crawling along his spine like an invisible hand. He recalled the shadowy figures he had glimpsed during the artifact's activation and wondered if they had Despite his growing paranoia, Arthur focused on the journal. The calculations his grandfather had scrawled were intricate, referencing celestial movements and coordinates that matched Stonehenge's alignment with the stars. The words, "The gate awaits," repeated across several pages, along with a warning Arthur couldn't ignore. To open is to step beyond what the mind can bear. What gate? And what would it cost to open it? By dusk, Arthur had prepared as best he could. The telescope he had brought was positioned in the center of the circle, aligned with the chart. He adjusted its focus as the first stars blinked into view. The whispers grew louder, forming a strange harmony with the hum of the stones, which now seemed to vibrate beneath his feet. Arthur's heart pounded as he spotted the celestial alignment his grandfather had drawn. The stars formed a perfect pattern, their light converging in the center of the stone circle. Suddenly, the ground trembled. Arthur gripped the telescope for balance as a faint glow spread from the stones. The air grew heavy with energy, crackling like a distant storm. The glow intensified, bathing the plain in golden light, and Arthur's breath quickened. He should have felt fear, but instead, a sense of purpose overtook him. Whatever this was, he was meant to see it through. A low, resonant voice echoed in his mind, clear and commanding. "You have crossed the threshold. The gate awaits." Arthur staggered as the glow coalesced into a shimmering structure at the center of the circle. It wasn't made of stone, but of light, its surface shifting like liquid gold. A gateway. Arthur's cane slipped from his grasp as he took a hesitant step toward it, his frail body drawn by an unseen force. He reached out, his fingers brushing the surface of the gateway. The moment he made contact, a torrent of visions flooded his mind. He saw civilizations rising and falling, beings of immense power shaping worlds, and the intricate threads of time unraveling and reweaving. The magnitude of what he witnessed was overwhelming, leaving him gasping for breath as he stumbled back. The whispers returned, softer now but insistent, carrying a singular message. The choice is yours. Step through, and the truth will... Arthur fell to his knees, clutching his chest as he tried to process what he had seen. The gateway pulsed with energy, as though alive and waiting. His grandfather's words echoed in his mind. The greatest truths lie not in answers, but in the courage to ask. Arthur realized the decision before him wasn't about knowledge, it was about trust. Trust in what lay beyond and in himself. The night deepened, and the stars above seemed to hold their breath as Arthur steadied himself. With one trembling hand, he reached for the journal, running his fingers over its worn pages. He closed his eyes, inhaled deeply, and prepared to make the most important decision of his life. Arthur stood at the edge of the shimmering gateway, his hand trembling as he reached for the rippling surface once more. The visions it had shown him lingered in his mind, a kaleidoscope of worlds, beings, and timelines. The whispering voice in his head echoed, urging him forward. "Step through," it beckoned, "and you shall know." The promise of answers was intoxicating. Closing his eyes, Arthur felt the pulsing energy radiating from the gateway. The air crackled as he took a hesitant step forward. His cane fell to the ground as his fingers pierced the gateway's surface. A jolt coursed through his body, tearing him apart and rebuilding him in ways that defied comprehension. For a moment, he was suspended in the void, his body stretched across infinite dimensions. When the sensation subsided, Arthur opened his eyes and gasped. He was no longer in Salisbury. Around him stretched a vast expanse of glowing crystalline structures, shifting and refracting light in impossible patterns. The sky above swirled with vibrant, otherworldly colors, while the ground beneath his feet pulsed with energy. It was beautiful and terrifying. "You have come," a voice echoed, resonating from the very air. Arthur turned, his heart pounding as a figure emerged from the light. Its form was humanoid but alien, translucent and constantly shifting like ripples in water. Its eyes, or what seemed to be its eyes, pierced him with an intensity that felt as though his soul was being laid bare. Who are you?" Arthur stammered, taking a step back. "We are the architects," the being replied, its voice layered as though spoken by many. "Guardians of the gate, keepers of the continuum." Arthur's breath hitched. He had crossed a threshold, and now he stood before beings who existed beyond his understanding. "Why was I brought here?" "You were not brought. You chose," the architect replied. "Few possess the will to cross the threshold. You seek answers, but you must first ask the right questions." Arthur's mind raced as the visions from the artifact resurfaced. Stars aligning, civilizations rising and falling, and shadowy beings walking through time. The artifact. What is it? What does it mean? "The artifact is a fragment of the source," the architect said, "a key to the truths that bind all realities. It chose you, Arthur Crane, because you stand at the precipice of choice." Arthur's legs trembled and he clutched at his chest. "Choice," he whispered. The architect gestured to the crystalline structures which shifted to reveal scenes from Arthur's life. He saw himself as a young boy, poring over his grandfather's journal with wide-eyed wonder. He saw his first lecture as a historian, his passion lighting up the room. Then came the image of Eleanor, his late wife, her face soft with love as she slipped away in his arms. "You carry longing, regret, and a hunger for understanding," the architect said. "The gate offers you the power to reshape what was, what is, and what will be, but such power comes at a cost." Arthur's heart ached as he stared at Eleanor's face. He could change everything, undo her death, rewrite their story. Yet the whispers in his mind grew louder, warning him. "What cost?" he asked. "To alter one thread is to unravel many," the architect said. "The continuum is delicate. The choices you make will ripple across realities, reshaping not only your life, but countless others. The power of the gate is not a gift, it is a burden." Arthur sank to the ground, overwhelmed. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, suffocating. The visions shifted again, showing him a future where the gate's power was unleashed, societies crumbling under knowledge they weren't ready for, and existence spiraling into chaos. At the center of it all was Arthur, his actions spreading destruction across time. Tears streamed down his face as he buried his head in his hands. "What am I supposed to do?" he whispered. The architect knelt before him, its light radiating warmth. "The answer lies not in what you desire, but in what you are willing to sacrifice. The truth you seek is not in the gate, but in yourself." Arthur looked up, his vision blurred by tears. The gateway remained open, a doorway to infinite possibilities, but the cost was clear. He thought of Eleanor, of the life they had shared, of the joy and the pain. He thought of his grandfather, whose endless pursuit of answers had led him here. Taking a deep, shuddering breath, Arthur reached for the journal in his satchel. As his hands trembled, the crystalline structures shifted again, showing not only his life, but lives he had never lived. In one, he saw himself as an old man surrounded by family, his wife alive and smiling. In another, he stood in a vast library of knowledge, ageless and alone. The paths stretched endlessly, branching into countless possibilities. Each one demanded a cost. "The greatest truths," the architect said softly, "are not in the answers, but in the courage to choose." Arthur wiped his tears, the weight of his years pressing down on him. With a final look at the shimmering gateway, he prepared to make the most important decision of his life. Arthur stood frozen at the precipice of decision, the weight of the architect's words pressing down on him. The shimmering gateway pulsed faintly, as if alive, waiting for his choice. Around him, the crystalline structures shifted, reflecting endless possibilities, countless futures he could create or destroy. Every moment he hesitated felt like an eternity, and yet, in this place, time itself seemed irrelevant. "The courage to choose," Arthur whispered, echoing the architect's words. He stared at the journal in his trembling hands. For decades he had followed its clues, driven by his grandfather's obsession, but now, standing at the threshold of the unknown, Arthur wasn't sure if he could bear the responsibility the gate demanded. "What happens if I turn back?" he asked, his voice barely audible. The architect's translucent form flickered faintly. "If you turn back, you will return to the life you know. The gate will close and the artifact will be lost to you forever. You will live out your remaining days as you are." Arthur's chest tightened at the thought of returning to his fragile body, his quiet house and the inevitability of death. "And if I step through?" "You will wield the power of the source," the architect replied. "You will see beyond the veil, reshape the threads of existence, and hold the knowledge of infinite possibilities. But you will also bear the burden of consequence. There will be no return." The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Arthur's thoughts whirled. The crystalline structures shifted again, forming images of his past. He saw his younger self, filled with hope, standing beside Eleanor on their wedding day. Her laugh echoed in his mind, warm and full of life. He could bring her back. He could undo everything. "I could fix it all," Arthur said, his voice cracking. The architect remained silent. "Perhaps," the architect said finally, "but the threads you alter will not only reshape your existence, but countless others. What you gain, others may lose. What you fix, others may break." Arthur's breath hitched. He thought of the vision he had seen, a future fractured by misuse of the gate's power. Entire worlds plunged into chaos because one person sought too much. The temptation to rewrite his life, to erase the pain of Eleanor's loss, was nearly unbearable. But at what cost? "I don't know if I'm strong enough," he admitted, his voice trembling. "How can anyone bear this weight?" "Strength lies not in knowing the outcome, but in accepting it," the architect said. Its glowing form seemed to dim, almost empathetic. Arthur sank to the glowing surface beneath him, the whispers weaving through his thoughts. He closed his eyes, overwhelmed. The journal slipped from his hands, its pages fluttering open to a familiar phrase. "The greatest truths lie not in what we take, but in what we leave behind." The words struck him deeply. For years he had chased answers, believing knowledge was the ultimate goal. But now, faced with the power to change everything, he realized the truth his grandfather had hinted at. Some mysteries were not meant to be solved. Their value lay in the pursuit, not the destination. Arthur opened his eyes and gazed at the architect. "If I step through, will I lose myself?" The architect's form flickered. "The self you are now will cease to be. The power of the source changes all who wield it. You will become something other." Arthur's breath caught. He had feared as much, but hearing it spoken aloud made the reality undeniable. Stepping through would not only alter the world around him, but erase the man he was, the man Eleanor had loved. Was he willing to give that up, even for the chance to rewrite the past? The gateway pulsed brighter, as though sensing his hesitation. The crystalline structures around him formed a new image, a vision of himself standing on the other side of the gate, ageless and alone, wielding unimaginable power but separated from the life he had known. The whispers grew louder, urging him to act before the gate closed forever. Arthur stood slowly, his frail body trembling. He picked up the journal, its worn cover cool beneath his fingers. His mind was clear now, the chaos of indecision fading into resolve. He turned to the architect, his gaze steady. "I've spent my life chasing the unknown, but the cost is too great." The architect inclined its head, the light within it softening. "And so you choose." Arthur stepped back from the gateway, his decision final. The crystalline structures shimmered, their forms dissolving into light. The gateway's pulse slowed, its glow dimming as it began to close. The whispers faded, leaving only silence. As the last traces of the gateway vanished, Arthur found himself back within the stone circle of Stonehenge. The cool dawn air brushed against his skin, and the weight of his years returned to him. He clutched the journal to his chest, a bittersweet smile on his face. The artifact, the gateway, the architect, they were gone, but their lessons remained. Arthur sank to the ground, his body exhausted but his soul at peace. For the first time in decades, he felt no need for answers, no compulsion to chase the unknown. He had chosen to leave the mystery behind, and in doing so, he had found himself. Arthur sat in the center of the stone circle, the journal clutched tightly to his chest. The morning air was cool, the sky painted in hues of soft pink and gold. Stonehenge stood silent around him, the ancient stones indifferent to the monumental choice he had just made. The weight of his decision pressed on him, yet his soul felt strangely light. For the first time in decades, Arthur was no longer chasing answers. He had chosen to leave the unknown as it was, preserving its mystery rather than seeking to unravel it. As he sat in the stillness, Arthur became aware of a faint hum. It was softer than before, barely audible, but it resonated within him like the lingering echo of a distant memory. He opened the journal, his fingers tracing the familiar handwriting of his grandfather. The pages seemed almost alive, filled with sketches and notes that no longer felt cryptic. The meaning behind the words was clearer now, as if his journey had unlocked some hidden part of his mind. "The gate is not the answer," Arthur murmured, reading one of the phrases his grandfather had written. "It is the question." His grandfather had spent his life searching for the artifact, believing it held the key to understanding the universe. Yet, in the end, the artifact had posed the ultimate question, leaving the answer to those brave enough to face it. Arthur's thoughts drifted back to the architect's final words. Strength lies not in knowing the outcome, but in accepting it. The architect had not been a guide or a judge, but a reflection of his own doubts and desires. It had forced him to confront what truly mattered. He realized now that his decision to turn away from the gate wasn't a rejection of knowledge. It was an embrace of the life he still had. He stood slowly, his legs trembling under the weight of his years. The aches of his fragile body returned, grounding him in his mortality. But Arthur no longer felt afraid. He had stared into the infinite and turned away, not out of fear, but out of understanding. Some knowledge was not meant to be possessed. Its value lay in its elusiveness. As he walked away from the circle, Arthur heard the faintest whispers once more. This time they did not come from the stones. They came from within, memories stirred by the journey he had undertaken. Images of Eleanor filled his mind, her laugh, her smile, the way she held his hand in quiet moments. For so long, he had focused on her loss that he had forgotten the beauty of the time they had shared. A tear rolled down Arthur's cheek as he made his way across the plain. The whispers faded with each step until only silence remained. Yet it was not emptiness that filled him. It was peace. The world around him seemed brighter, more vivid. The morning sun cast long shadows across the plain, and the wind carried the scent of grass and earth. For so many years he had been consumed by his quest for answers, blind to the simple beauty of life. Now he could finally see. At the small inn where he had been staying, Arthur accepted tea and scones from the innkeeper with a quiet smile. The warmth of the tea spread through him, grounding him in the present. As he sipped, Arthur opened the journal again. The artifact was gone. The gate closed, but the lessons remained. The journal was no longer a map to the unknown. It was a testament to the journey he had taken, a record of the man he had become. Arthur spent the day in reflection, writing his thoughts in the margins of his grandfather's notes. He did not try to decipher the remaining ciphers. Instead, he added his own words to the story. "Some mysteries," he wrote, "are not meant to be solved. Their beauty lies in their existence, not in their explanation." As the sun dipped below the horizon, Arthur felt a deep sense of contentment. The journal lay open before him, its pages glowing softly in the lantern's light. He had found his peace, not in the answers he had sought, but in the questions he had dared to ask. That night, Arthur slept deeply for the first time in years. His dreams were filled with images of Eleanor, not as she was in her final moments, but as she had been in life. Vibrant, joyful, full of love. In his dreams, she held his hand, smiling with an understanding that needed no words. When he awoke the next morning, tears were on his cheeks, but they were not of sorrow. They were of gratitude. Arthur left the inn later that day, the journal safely tucked in his satchel. He walked slowly but purposefully, his cane tapping softly against the cobblestones. The world stretched before him, full of mysteries he no longer felt compelled to solve. He was no longer the man who had arrived at Stonehenge, burdened by questions and regrets. He was a man who had chosen to let go. As he disappeared down the path, the wind carried the faintest whisper, a trace of the infinite, a reminder of the unknown. Arthur did not look back. For the first time, he was truly at peace with the mystery, knowing that some truths are best left untold. Arthur's life had settled into a rhythm, each day blending into the next. Weeks turned into months, and the memory of Stonehenge began to fade into the recesses of his mind. He rarely opened the journal now, leaving it on his desk like a relic of a past life. Yet the whispers, though faint, had never truly disappeared. At first, Arthur dismissed them as remnants of his imagination, echoes of a mind stretched to its limits. But as time passed, the whispers grew stronger, more insistent. They weren't words, but impressions, a feeling of something waiting just beyond the veil of reality. Late at night, when the world was still, they crept into his thoughts, stirring a curiosity he thought he had laid to rest. One evening, as Arthur sat by the fireplace, the whispers surged. This time, they carried a sensation he hadn't felt since Stonehenge, a subtle vibration in the air, an electric charge that prickled his skin. He glanced at the journal, its pages fluttering as if stirred by an unseen wind. And then he saw it, a faint symbol in the margins of one of his grandfather's sketches. It had always been there, but only now did it seem to glow faintly in the firelight. Arthur leaned closer, his breath catching. It wasn't just a symbol. It was a coordinate, a set of numbers forming a pattern he recognized instantly. It wasn't Stonehenge. It was somewhere else. The rational part of him screamed to ignore it. He had made his choice, turned away from the gate, and embraced the simplicity of life. But the whispers pressed him, urging him forward. The part of him that had spent a lifetime chasing mysteries refused to let go. The next morning, Arthur packed his satchel, tucking the journal inside. His body protested with every movement, the weight of his years making each step an ordeal. Yet, something deeper drove him. He didn't know where the coordinates would lead, but he couldn't turn his back on them. The unknown still called to him, and he had to answer. The journey took him to a remote mountain range, far from civilization. The coordinates led him to a plateau high above the clouds. He climbed slowly, each step a battle against his frailty until he reached the summit. There, nestled among the rocks, was something that defied explanation. It was a structure, ancient yet impossibly pristine, its surface gleaming with an ethereal light. It resembled no architecture Arthur had ever seen, a blend of organic curves and geometric precision. The whispers grew louder as he approached, their tone shifting from a gentle hum to a chorus of overlapping voices. Arthur's hands trembled as he placed them on the surface of the structure. The moment he made contact, the world dissolved. He was no longer on the plateau. Instead, he stood in a void of shifting lights and shadows, a space that existed beyond time and matter. And then they appeared. Figures emerged from the void, their forms indistinct yet radiant. They were the architects, or perhaps something greater. Their presence overwhelmed him, flooding his mind with emotions and thoughts too vast to comprehend. Arthur fell to his knees, unable to speak. "You have returned," one of the figures said, its voice resonating like a celestial symphony. "Why?" Arthur struggled to find the words. "The journal. It led me here," he said at last, his voice barely a whisper. "Your journey was complete," another voice said. "You chose to turn away from the gate. Why do you seek us now?" Arthur's chest tightened. He didn't know the answer. He had been content, or so he thought. But the whispers had drawn him back, the pull of the unknown too strong to resist. "I don't know," he admitted. "I thought it was over." The figures surrounded him, their light shifting like liquid gold. "The choice was yours to make," one of them said. Yet the choice is never final. The thread of curiosity weaves through all things. You are here because you cannot let go, and so the question remains, what do you seek? Arthur closed his eyes, the weight of their words pressing down on him. What did he seek? He thought of Eleanor, of his grandfather, of the life he had lived and the mysteries he had chased. He thought of the gate, the visions, and the overwhelming vastness of the unknown, and then he realized the truth. "I don't seek answers," he said, his voice trembling. "I seek the questions." The figures paused, their light dimming for the briefest moment. To seek the question is to seek the essence of existence, one of them said, and yet, to seek endlessly is to be consumed. What will you choose, Arthur Crane? Arthur's breath caught. Once again the choice was before him, to step forward into the unknown or to turn away and embrace the life he had. But this time, the choice felt different. It wasn't about fear or strength. It was about acceptance. He stood slowly, his frail body trembling. "I've made my choice," he said softly. "The mystery is enough. The question is enough." The light around him softened, the figures retreating into the void. "Then go in peace, seeker of questions. The gate will remain, as it always has." Arthur opened his eyes and found himself back on the plateau, the structure gone. The whispers were silent now, the air still. He turned and began his descent, the weight of the journey lifting with each step. For the first time, he truly understood. The mystery was never meant to be solved. It was meant to be lived.